So welcome all for day 2 of Customer Success Bootcamp. Today we're going to talk through segmentation, health, and effort. So since last week, we have done a few things. First, Mark and Casey both went through and checked everybody's site to see who could see customer success, who couldn't see, and if you've set up tickets, this, that, or the other. So we know many of you are just kind of looking out at customer success and don't have the platform. Welcome. Many of you have the platform and have everything else set up. So welcome there too. Everybody should have gotten today an email based on what we found. So you should have an email that either says, unless you're all set up and ready to go, we know you know that you're in, because we can tell that you have set everything up. But some of you might have gotten an email saying, hey, thanks for joining customer success. Did you want us to turn on a trial for you so you can poke around? Or are you just here to kind of get the content, or an email saying, we can see you're in, but you need this access or that access, etc. So Mark and Casey, who are both on screen, can absolutely help take emails, comments, questions, complaints, criticisms. If you don't want to put it in the public chat, you can just chat either of them directly and say, I need X, Y, or Z, and we will get to following up with you. So is there anything anybody does want to shout out about that right out of the gate as part of following up from homework from last week?
Emotional outbursts are well received here.
Also acceptable are emotional outbursts.
Yeah. Also, I know Marnie was just saying a story about creepers and stalkers. Casey and I did that for your benefit. Not right? Please don't call the Maryland State Police on us.
Yeah, not necessary for that. Correct. Okay, so if we don't have questions, or I'll take a breath in case we do. Also, you should be able to raise your hand in the chat, or in the, you can either chat, you can just come off mute, or you can put your hand up in the participant list. Any of those ways, we'll try to get you if you have some more questions. So we want to start with a conversation around, oh, somebody has their hand up. Look at that. Perfect. Gary. Were you just practicing?
Teams.
Oh, okay, perfect. And hand down. Just testing. Perfect. We got it. And so your box will pop up for me, and we'll be able to see straight away. So we're good to go on that. So the very first thing, and I brought, I was a teacher, so can't be far from a whiteboard, although this board, I dare say, is smeared gray at this point. But we're going to do some pieces on here today. I'm going to share this document in chat that I'm going to show in a second. And you will be able to make a copy if you are a digital note taker, or if you have a notebook with you, you can play along at home and kind of build this chart for yourself. So I'm going into page 2, and we're going to talk about segmentation to start. Some of you may have heard a piece of this before, but we're going to do maybe 15-ish minutes around just kind of an overview of these pieces and parts, and then health and effort. And then we're going to dive into the platform and work our way through it. So after we talk through segmentation, we'll do the health and effort pieces in the platform and on my whiteboard. So if you're in, I know you're all Outlook folks, and I just gave you a Google Doc, but if you just hit file and make a copy, you can then go and draw on it to yourself, print it out in the channel. Print it out, or again, paper and pencil. Also at the bottom of it, and Mark, can you repost it? Because we just let a few people in, they won't see it. I posted an article from CompTIA, which is where I was this week, about customer experience and some of their research. So that might be something that folks want to take.
You can continue on your system. So I've just made the.
Okay, thank you. All right. So we've got a chart. I want you, if you're paper and pencil, to think about high value, high complexity. So we're going to talk about clients that high MRR, but also a lot of work. So think of one of your clients that's high value, high effort, and I want you to write their name in box A. High value, high effort. So typically, this is probably one of your largest clients. If you have a Department of Defense contract, they probably are high effort. Medical services that are PCI, FERPA, HIPAA, and all the other things compliant, et cetera. In quadrant B, I want you to write down the name of a high value, low effort client. High value, low effort. Probably one of your more profitable clients, maybe your favorite client. Let's face it, they're paying you a lot of money and they're not a squeaky wheel. Who lands in that quadrant? In quadrant C, low value, low effort. So you might have quite a few of these. I would call these kind of standard. They don't require much from you. I talked to one prospect this morning who said that they have partners that they don't even speak to. They just auto renew and auto escalate throughout the year. So they're pretty easygoing, low value, low effort. We did talk about what else we can do for those partners, so we'll get there in a minute. And then if you think this piece of paper is going to make it out of your house, you can use initials instead of actually writing the name in this top left quadrant, because it is going to be the high value, the low value, high effort, basically pain in the behind client who is in quadrant D, who is your low value. They're not paying you enough for the amount of work, pain, or angst they are causing you or your team. So as we look at these groups, we are going to look at them so that we can talk about what is setting up the proper cadence and communication with them. But not just that, we want to start documenting what we're going to do with them quarter over quarter. So when I talk about this, we like to say that our top right quadrant, high value, high effort, is high touch. They're quarterly or monthly clients. So here I would kind of take note in my quadrant. All right, quarterly, monthly, how do we divvy these up? If you've worked with some of the coaches will say, if you look at how many thousands of dollars they spend with you per month is how many cadences you should meet with them per year. Oh, excuse me. So if you have somebody paying you $15,000 a month, that would be at so over $12,000 a year would be monthly, right? They're paying you enough to warrant a monthly cadence. If they're paying you $1,000 a month, that's a whole different story, right? That would be once a year you're going to meet with them. So a quarterly would be $4,000 a month as an approximation. Now, this was what was suggested 3 years ago before supply chain issues and a greater need for managed services. So it might be, divisible by 1,500 instead of 1,000. But think about who lands in this quadrant. I had a client, I tell a story all the time about a client who paid $1.7 million a year. You know how often they met with me? As often as they wanted, right? But I did do quarterly executive business reviews and then smaller monthly reviews with their on-site project team, but I didn't have all of the execs in monthly. So just something to think about. Any other ideas for that group? Any other ways folks talk about it, or did that make sense? Thumbs up. Good. Bottom right quadrant is mid-touch. So this is semi-annual or annual, right? And we touched on this a bit last week. Not everybody needs or warrants a true quarterly business review, right? They're not paying you enough to be profitable. And frankly, you start to be a thorn in some folks' side if you insist on quarterly business reviews. Now, I would say doctor's offices, people paying you $300 a seat warrant and need quarterly business reviews. But I mentioned a florist last week. My husband's a landscaper. If you ask my husband to meet with you quarterly about his 3 assets, he would flip his lid, right? There would be none of that. You could get on the tractor with him if you wanted to come talk to him, but it's spring and he has no time to talk with you, right? So, but he also has 3 assets. It would cost you more money to drive out there and sit on the tractor with him than you'd be making in the year, right? So that's why we're segmenting these, is to make sure everybody gets the cadence that they need, want, and deserve. I absolutely have fired a customer success manager for one of my vendors when I was in the education space and said, if you have that man insist on calling me every Friday, I am not going to work with your company anymore. It's that annoying to me, right? You are 1/18 of my job. I do not have time to talk to you for an hour on Friday mornings. I also don't have enough issues that I'm getting any value out of it. They got me a new customer success manager. And in fact, they ended up hiring me as that person's boss. So we got where we needed to be, but segmenting is part of it. In this mid-touch semi-annual annual, one of the things I would encourage you to document in here, and I did put a couple of blank note pages so you could actually document some of this in addition to the names of clients. What are you doing to collect referrals from this particular group? These are probably your most profitable. I think I said these 2 lines last week, but honestly, I've been in Chicago since then, so I'm going to say it again, especially because we've got some new people on the call. The Alex way of saying this, so Alex was trained in sales, right? And Alex will say, hey, John, did you get value out of this business review today? And John, of course, is going to say yes, head nod. Alex gives a great business review, right? But then he's going to say, do you have other folks that you work with that could get the same value out of a relationship with our MSP, right? And aims to get the referral. I am not a natural born salesperson, even though I did sell pre-calc to 16-year-olds. I prefer to go the customer success route and trick them into it, right? Like I did with 16-year-olds. So I could say, Zach, I really enjoy working with you. I always have a good time chatting with your company. I think you guys do great business. I would love to send people your way. Who would be a good client for you? Who would be a good referral to you? You know, I work with a lot of other businesses. Zach's now nodding his head, thinking about how to answer that question. And then the other half of Zach is thinking, oh, well, what would be a good referral for her? Like she's helping me out. So I kind of want to help her out too. Zach, is that true? Were you kind of like, oh, I see, I would have gotten there? Yeah.
Certainly is.
Yeah. So depending on your strategy and your, desire to be bold, not that asking for referral is overly bold, but it is sometimes uncomfortable. I think having a process for quadrant B is really important. So I would document what we really want to do is build out a process for your customer success program. They don't all have to be the same. That's what makes you special, is the customer facing part of your organization. So think about what are things we can do for this quadrant B. They are probably our most profitable favorite clients. What are we doing to get more of them? The other piece is, once we get into the platform and look at this group, we want to look at different verticals and see who lands here. Wouldn't it be interesting to find out, and maybe surprising, that all of our dentists landed in this category? What would that tell you? Go market to dentists, right? If our lawyers are in quadrant D, that'll be a whole nother conversation. But it will be interesting to see if some of the verticals start showing you that you can really target some marketing to an ideal client profile. Bottom left is Tech Touch. So this is your annual or virtual business review. Like I said, I talked to someone this morning who said they send out a virtual, they send out an email renewal every year and sometimes don't even give them a phone call as a part of their renewal process. What they were talking to me about this morning is the fact that they're concerned that their competitors are going to start talking to them. So they want to add a cadence to have some conversations with them, which I think is really important to think about. Just because they're easy to support, if you're not actually talking to them, doesn't mean somebody else isn't talking to them. Heard a quote from Gartner that said small businesses, so small businesses were polled, and they reported back that they expect 85% of their relationship with their enterprise vendors, of which managed services are one. They expect 85% of that to happen virtually. Notifications, emails, automation. But 15% they expect to be personalized to their business and with a relationship or human engagement. So if you think about our $1,000 marking, right? What would 15% of that total yearly contract be in terms of customized communication or personalized in terms of a webinar, you know, a virtual conversation, a Teams call, a Zoom call, etc. So that's what we're looking at in this lower left quadrant, is what can we do to support these folks so that they still hear from us, but they're not costing us more than they're delivering for us. One of the strategies that I've heard our partners talk about is using the marketing system to remarket to these partners with the same questions and conversations that they would have in a business review, but as a marketing tool to have them outreach back to you if they want some follow-up. So, hey, it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Did you know you're covered because you work with me? Or like, does this keep you up at night? Did you know we can offer those services? I was talking to one partner who said that he had lost a client because a competitor had come in and talked about all of the services that they could offer them. And our client had the exact same services, but had not mentioned that to the person because they'd not done a business review with them. So they lost a client, could have done the exact same thing, but because they had not gotten in front of them and said, hey, did you know we do web development too? They lost that client for all their services. And then top left, low value, high effort. I mentioned this last week. This is the Michael Michalowicz pumpkin plan quadrant. So there are 3 things you can do with this quadrant. And this is to renegotiate the contract, right? So they move to top right. They're paying you what you deserve. You eliminate their pain points, right? They won't get rid of their 1902 server. So, you know, it's causing pain. You convince them that they are going to do this, or they're not going to be one of your clients, so they can maybe move to that automated piece, or they are the ones that you fire. I've had lots of interesting conversations around folks who have attempted to fire clients and have not been successful, but the clients have started to pay them more money. And we have 2 partners that have actually given me a case study that have talked about the fact that in the past 2 years, they have intentionally, one of them has cut 35 partners and one has cut 18. And they have both, one has doubled and one has tripled. They're not just their ARR, but their profitability as well. So having the right partners makes a difference. And a lot of folks will ask me, what does the research say? And I can give you a list of books that I read on this, right? I just don't make this stuff up. They will ask what, where do I start when it comes to which of these segments do I deal with first? And they will say every Monday, you should look at your top left quadrant and see if there's an action item you can take to move the needle on one of those. It doesn't just help your business in terms of bottom line. It also helps in terms of client retention. I mean, employee retention. Goodness, get it straight, Marnie. So think about that. Think about the partner that whose name you were nervous to write in case it would be seen in public in the top left quadrant. If that thorn in your side wasn't ever going to show up on your caller ID, would you have a happier time at work? Or would your tier 1 tech team have a happier time at work, right? Let's face it, customer success is the first line of defense. If you've read the book that I wrote, I started with the lines like catching bullets with my teeth and taking knives in my back. Those were things people legit said to me my first week of work. I was like, what have I gotten myself into? I just wanted to help school systems use technology to get better student outcomes. And people are telling me I'm taking knives in the back, right? So if you think about the power of moving folks out of that quadrant, it is better for your team as well. So as usual, comments, complaints, questions, criticisms, but more like thoughts on that. Is this true? Did I say anything where you're like, I completely disagree with that? Or, yep, that's right. And you have maybe some other ideas about how to support them or move them. I see some head nods. Oh, go ahead, Katerina. Are you unmuting? Good.
Hi, Katrina.
Katrina.
So I have never thought about moving a client from D over to A. I did exactly what you said. I had a client who was in that A column, and I said, listen, it's not working for you and I could not get rid of the client. They literally signed the contract for more money, which, I walked away. My technicians were very excited, thinking, here we go, losing this troubled client. And I retained them. And they were like, well, this is the opposite effect. However, the moment we raised their prices, I noticed that the ticket submissions went down some. So maybe in their mind, they somehow thought, okay, we're paying more. Let's not submit as many tickets, even though they had unlimited access to. So I'm looking forward to working with my team and identifying all of our Ds and putting together a strategy so we can move them over into a different category. So thanks for that today.
Well, and I think that's exactly right. Come up with like, these are 3 ways we could deal with them. Come up with the best one. And again, you might think the best one is to fire them, and your client may not put like, okay, they're my client again. But you then lay down the law of like, this is the struggle of working with you, right? You never tell it, you never give us advance notice. That's a big one, right? So everything's a fire for you. We're not doing that. You need emergency services from us. We're leveling it up to this price, like whatever it may be, but to be able to chart out. And I would start by listing all of the pains that make anyone land in D, and then have a resolution for acceptable movement out of D, right? You call every night at 9 p.m. Guess what? We'll have no more of that. You want to call at 9 p.m.? You're going to pay dearly for that, right? So it's that whole notion of when they do put their money where their mouth is in terms of getting the support that they need. I think you're right. They do start to see like, oh, we just thought of them as we could just take, kind of use and abuse, but they're actually not going to put up with that. So, and again, your team will be happier because they're not. It'll at least pay for some pizza when you do have those fire drills, right? Other thoughts? Anybody else have?
Yeah, I just put this in chat, Marnie, is stack alignment really plays into that. Is if you're trying to support things that either, the 1902 server, as you put it, or just every piece, every recommendation you make, they go a different direction. And we see that with co-managed clients quite a bit. It's like, it just, the value's not there. The profit margin will never be there because you're wasting twice as long to fix something that in your own stack you could normally fix. And finding the right customer fit is crucial to get everybody out of that D category that you can.
Yep. You reminded me of something that I'll be sure to share next week on the stack alignment week. So thank you for saying the words co-managed. So that's the first piece of kind of how I want to deal with folks. But the next piece is let's think about, and I showed a circle last week when I talked about what we did in working with school systems. This will vary by location, by your process, and for sure by your any verticals that you work with. So this chart might need to be repeated 5 times if you work with 5 different verticals. Let's see if my board has dried enough that, oh, that'll do it. Perfect. So, right, we've got winter, spring, summer, and fall. And it might be maybe not seasons, but it might be, you might need to do this twice, once with winter, spring, summer, fall, and once with this right here is my renewal date. And what you want to think about is what are things that happen or need to happen ahead of various time periods in one of your clients' life cycle. So let's talk about accountants as a case in point. What date do we care about for accountants?
For the end of the month and the first week of the month.
Right, and then April 15th, right?
Or
So
June 15th.
Or June 15th. Is anyone going to schedule a quarterly business review with their accountant on April 15th or their drunk accountant on April 16th? No, right? So this is where you want to think about what dates are important to my client, and then what's important for me to do for them to support them for this. So April 15th is the no-fly zone for QBRs for your accountants. But April 1st through 15th, if anybody's going to have a slowdown that can't afford a slowdown of technologies, it's an accountant, right? So if there's anything where you need to make sure your accountant's tickets get leveled up, right? Like, what services can we do to be ahead of the game? If you are an MSP that, delivers gifts to folks at the holidays, maybe you deliver a Snickers bar and be like, going to be here a while to the accountants on April 1st, because they've got 15 days where they're not going to leave an office. So if we're aiming for some delight and surprise for partners, if you think about what's important to them, April 15th is very important to them. What can you do to make their lives easier? And then keeping that in mind, what happens the week after April 15th? If you can follow up with them within a month and find out what pained them up through the 15th, might you have some productivity tools that would be useful for them? Might you need some team trainings to help them better utilize teams to make them more efficient, right? What are some services and things? It's interesting. I can watch eyes when folks start to think, and literally half my screen just looked up and to the left. So I don't know what's up and to the left that's going to solve it, but I find that intriguing. So start thinking about how can you identify, right? You just had your tough period. What was the struggle for you in terms of technology? We'd like to make sure we smooth that out for you this year. I've been to a couple sessions where the folks who run customer success at Disney have presented, and Disney always calls 6 weeks after you've had a Disney vacation, because they know your credit card bill just came due and you are probably the least happiest with Disney at that moment. So what they want to know is, what was your favorite thing? Like, what made it worth all of that money, right? When you're at Disney. So they remind you of the positive things. And they also certainly hear all of the honest negative feedback at that point. So it's sort of the same thing for accountants. Yes, you probably don't want to go the week after because they are recovering. So you need a solid, give them a month. But just think about, that's kind of when we talk about segmentation, it's not just how often we meet with them, but the timing of what makes sense for them. So one of the things I encourage you to do is think about seasonality. Are there places where the seasons matter, right? October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and you might think, but everybody advertises then. Well, that means everybody else is advertising to your partners at the same time too, right? And then in terms of customer success, is there something you do in advance of that to make sure they're ready? Like in September, hey, Cybersecurity Awareness Month is coming up. You're going to hear a lot about it. Let us tell you what we're doing to make sure you are protected, right? So now, every time they see a cybersecurity awareness ad, what are they thinking? Thank goodness Billy called. He told me I'm covered for all of this, right? So literally everybody else's advertisement is advertising for you. So that's kind of an interesting take on it. So my encouragement is to, on slide 5, after you've decided segment cadence, what you're going to do, after you've decided each quarter what needs to be done, would be to go through and create a communication plan in each quadrant. They all deserve the same communication, maybe not quadrant D, let's face it, they're a little different. But how is it going to be delivered? Quadrant A, is it always face-to-face? What if this will get taken care of in weekly check-in emails versus a business review? Quadrant C, everything is going to be automated, but what's the timing of that? What's the pacing of that, right? That makes sense for folks. So as you build out your customer success program, I think these are the things you want to document along the way. The other comment, one of our partners goes back to this circle and picks a different theme for each season. And all of the business reviews for that season focus on the same thing. If I'm remembering correctly, he has a user training quarter, a cybersecurity product quarter, an ancillary services recorder. So they talk about VoIP and web development and productivity tools, et cetera. And then one quarter, it's the full assessment. So they always give an assessment update, but that's the focus for the different quarters. So anybody else, like, does that trigger ideas? Does anybody else have a different strategy? I love hearing and sharing those stories.
I know that we do have a quarterly cadence, but honestly, for ancillary things, additional products and services, and then also where we're seeing a ton of just unplanned sideways, like cybersecurity insurance requirement changes that come at very different months. We use that as a trigger for a supplementary meeting, which we can code within Lifecycle as a different type of meeting. And with the new features, which I love, attendees and agendas and putting stuff in there, but we try to keep those, they tend to be shorter, but they're definitely much more topical, and they seem to be more tactical in their response as opposed to strategic, because it's addressing and solving an immediate concern or an immediate need. We also do the same thing anytime that anyone experiences an event. So if they have a breach or if they have some kind of user thing or whatever, we'll have a supplementary meeting that's directly associated with that. And oftentimes we'll have requirements that come out of that. So say they've refused MFA for some reason, and now they've had an event. Well, now to do business with us, we're requiring that you deploy MFA, and we're going to have a meeting about that, et cetera, et cetera. So we have some processes in place for that that tend to fill in the calendar, even if they are segmented differently. Those are the triggers.
I think Katrina's like, yep, that MFA one goes on for those people that we're going to move out of D2, right? So I'm so glad you brought up the cybersecurity insurance one. As we talk about contracts, so I'm in the platform, I think everybody has at least gotten this far in their homework. One of the third-party contracts that we absolutely recommend is putting in their cybersecurity insurance renewal date. If you can get ahead of that, right? Face it, do you want a fire to answer their 150 question cybersecurity insurance form with them? Or would you rather tell them in advance, we need to prep for it? And keep in mind that down here, you can decide if you want to be notified in advance of their actual renewal date or the notice date. And you can choose the number of days. If it's something bigger like cybersecurity insurance renewal, you might want 60 or 90 days, so you can be sure to schedule the meeting and the check-in, versus maybe a shorter thing that they'll flip on a little faster. You could do a 30-day notice for yourself. So
the other piece, Marnie, that's also really important that we track in here, sorry to add this in there, is Microsoft 365 licensing. If we manage that, because annual licensing renewal dates, they have like a very short period of time to review and then adjust their renewals, especially if you're using like PAX 8, very short window. So you want to have good 30 days, 45 days of time to pull if they have a large number of licenses or a mix of licenses or a hybrid environment of licenses with Azure and all the other stuff, to review, go through, and then renew at the right levels. So we
Yep.
do that as well as a outside of the QBR cadence because it's dictated by that renewal date.
Oh, yeah, that's one of those when you put it on their individual cycle, right? Of like, that's another date that is mission critical for them. There are lots of ways to do this. I worked obviously with school systems, so this was very easy for me to always say every spring we're going to do this with everybody, but it very much comes down to individual clients and their contracts sometimes. Billy, you put in the chat the FTC safeguards. We actually have Chris Weiser and Cindy Phillips are going to come on our Friday workshop, not this week, but next week, to talk about the FTC safeguards, because we're hearing a lot more about that. So if those of you who aren't familiar with them, be sure to join that week if that topic interests you, because it's coming for sure. So let's talk about getting the segmentation in, and then we'll go back to effort and health. Because I do want to give time in the platform as I promised. So hopefully you are playing along at home. We'll just do this a bite-sized piece in the platform and then cover those other two pieces. And then I'll spend the last bit of time in the platform so that folks that aren't in customer success can jump off if they are not interested in playing along. So one of the things we talked about last week, there are two pieces we mentioned for segmentation. One is if you want to automate this, you need to be pulling over you're importing your contracts or manually entering contracts for all of your clients. So you can tell they're imported if you got the asterisks. I know I saw a lot of tickets coming through with people getting help on this. Jacob, I'm glad that worked for you. I saw a lot of people doing this work. So hopefully it worked for folks, and then manually entering them. So I'm going to move to customer success in a minute to show you where that lands. The scheduler is the other piece. Steve mentioned he came and caught up with me in Chicago, and we talked some things about the scheduler. So there are a couple of things that we're going to try to add in. One of which is currently when you go into a client. So I'm going to go into Lacuna, and in meetings, so top right, I am going to click schedule. And we can do monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, or annual. We're going to try to add 3 times per year. So every 4 months, because some folks said that is just the cadence that makes the most sense for them. We are also this is going to take a little longer, but I've heard multiples, and Steve was the one live, but I know I've heard from other people too, that want to have 2 types of cadences. So a business review cadence, and then John, you mentioned, I want to be able to have phone calls, and I want to make sure I schedule them monthly, but that's not my business review, right? So one of the things that we're going to, when we get that in, we will want you to select a primary cadence so that is the segmentation of your business review, but you could also do phone check-ins, project meetings, etc. So that's what you're going to want to do in order to fill out this scheduler tab for all of your clients. This weekend, they're going over it actually in 15 minutes. They're going to go over the release where they will have the tables, the little tiles at the top that I showed you last week. So you can expect log out this weekend, log in on Monday, and you should have some new features here. But let's talk about, now that the contracts are in the VCIO side of the house, how do we get them to populate on the upper left-hand corner in the segmentation chart? One thing to note, we did push a release last weekend. If you could all check the bottom of your screen and make sure you see the date 3/13/2023 at the bottom of yours. If you do not, I am going to force a sign out link for you. So if you don't see that date, sign out, sign back in, you'll find things work a lot faster. So if you've been having any issues, you might just not have gotten the new code. Okay, first I'm going to show you where this lands in customer detail, and then talk about how we can adjust it. Inside customer detail, so I don't want to be in Lacuna, I want to be in creative designs. I'm in creative designs. You can see I've populated some detail, right? I can edit the profile. Do highly recommend doing a little executive summary about a client. Think about this. If you suddenly went on vacation and a client called in and a new customer success manager had to follow up after you, you would love to know something about that client, easy squeezy, right? This client loves us for X, Y, or Z, just some basic information around that. But the important thing of what we want to talk about today is the monthly recurring revenue. This is what we're going to use for the segmentation chart to determine the value. You may manually override this. Why do folks manually override it? Well, there are all kinds of reasons. The most popular reason to manually override would be they're on a small contract now, but they're acquiring another company and they're going to double, and you really want it to land in top right instead of toward the middle because the MRR's got a much larger opportunity. But for the most part, folks use whatever comes over in terms of contracts. So you can click here and see exactly what contracts they have. And if you look in this column, exclude from customer success MRR, you will see the ones that if they're not checked, they are not excluded. That's what's being included. So in my case, the block of time and the MDM software and whatever this is, BDR, is included in my MRR, but we're not including these blue checks, and that's based on rule, and I'll show you those rules. And the green check, I manually excluded the Microsoft Azure AD. So that means I went into Microsoft contract and edited and said, I want to exclude this from customer success down here. So if there's any contract that pulled over. Okay, Mark, can you chat with Micah in the and see the story there? Micah.
Yeah, I was
there. Perfect, thank you. So we want to decide what gets included in our MRR. So just think to yourself, is what's being pulled over from my PSA all I want to include as the value, or do I want to include some of those manual contracts that I entered? This is definitely results vary based on who I'm talking to. So think about where you fall in that. And let's decide how to set that up. I'm going to go back into Creative Design's customer detail. And when I come to take a look at the contracts, you're going to see I've decided to include these contracts and exclude these. So we're going to be able to exclude some. How do we do that? If I go into CS account settings, CS app settings, this is where you can decide globally which contracts you want to exclude or include. So you can see here, I excluded all of the vendors that, of course, my demo site has some odd ones, right? But I can also exclude any accounts that have Office 365 in them or leasing in them, etc. So you can just, if you click into the drop down, you can say, I want to exclude any contract that has the word Microsoft in it, or I want to exclude anything that has the words Office 365 in it, etc. So questions about that, thoughts on vendors you might exclude, thoughts on account types you might exclude, or just like, I need to dig in and do that work. The most popularly excluded one, anything Microsoft 365, because the profitability on a Microsoft license is very small. So you might have tons of Microsoft licenses, which drive the MRR value up, but that's not really your business MRR, right? That's just a small increment. So that is the most popular one to exclude. And most folks do only use kind of the managed service agreement pieces, not kind of the ancillary contracts. So your call on what you do, but I just like to share what I typically see. Thoughts on that? Would love feedback on, like, they're crazy. They should also include the amount of ice cream they buy from us per month or whatever it is. So, so if you regularly get special projects for them, right? So the question is, just for the people listening to the audio, how do you recommend we account for special projects or labor not included on the contract? If you regularly get projects from, like, month over month, this client is always delivering an extra $10,000 worth of projects to us, we don't know what it's going to be, that's the prime example to do a manual override, right? So if or include, you could create a single contract that's like special projects, and you know you've got a budgeted amount for it, so you can either put it in as a manual override inside the client detail, or create kind of a holder contract for for a specific, like, again, project bucket of funds. That's a good question, because I know that some of our partners talk about clients that regularly spend the same amount in terms of our project, but we can't contract it out because we don't know what it's going to be. The other piece for segmentation, and I don't know how many folks dig into this, and our segmentation chart does take a while to populate. It's a lot of data that it's regenerating every time. So let's talk through what segment value is showing on the screen. So you can see here, I've got contract MRR and the segment value. If I don't have any contracts on the VCIO side of the house, it's going to be empty. If I want it to populate on the screen, I can just manually type in a value. So if I said this was 3,500, as soon as this saves, it's going to get a green check mark next to it. And the green check mark is going to denote whether I'm using the contract value or the segment value. So if I wanted to suddenly use the contract value, I could just deselect the checkbox and switch it back. So this one here, look at no cheers. You can see contract is pulling over 1,450. I've overridden it. Just for an example, if I X out of it, it'll pick up this value instead. So you can decide per client, I want to use the contract value or I want to override it. The other piece here is, as you hover over, right, it's going to show you what we're using, which should match on the bottom. And one thing that folks haven't necessarily picked up or used a lot is if I go into the gear, it's not surprising turn of events that it means I can manage my columns, right? That's what the gear does in Lifecycle Insights. But anything that we're going to pull over in a minute around health or effort will populate in this column. So you could create a report of almost any value that you manually enter in Lifecycle to build this report. Again, it's just rows and columns, but you can sort rather by it, and then filter by account manager, account group, etc., which is always interesting. So I can add, I'll add the default assessment. So now I can see this column is the assessment scores, and I can sort it so that I've got top to bottom. So I can now rank my clients based on their default assessment score. So top to bottom, or number of contracts hours used. If I've manually added that, I can see Goliath National Bank is taking most of the time. Any other thoughts on segmentation before I jump into effort and health? All right. Now I'm going to jump back to the slide deck for just a minute. I did include on slide 6, you should be able to click into the Freshdesk articles on how to set any of these pieces up. If you need other help, just email support. They will happily get you what you need. Effort. I did, again, top right, there's an effort metrics article, same thing for health. Would love to talk about some ideas of see if we're dry enough that I can erase. I can. So what are some indications that a client is a lot of effort? When I say that, either effort or complexity, what are some things you immediately think about?
Number of tickets.
Yeah.
I don't have a nice way of saying it, but unnecessary requests is probably the most PC that I can be about it.
After hours requirements, weekend support,
Good one.
and then requests that fall outside of the scope of our engagement. So hourly billing, break fix
Yeah.
stuff.
Third-party vendor. That you get pulled into, that they assume is in the scope of their.
Oh, yeah. Like you have to support their line of business application that they don't purchase through you type of thing.
Uh-huh.
How about locations, number of locations? Is that?
I think mobility as a whole is, in the last 3 years has become a challenge. You used to go to an office, solve a problem, and now those offices could be anywhere in the country, or in someone's house. I won't tell you how many tickets we get on poor internet.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would agree with Steve, but I would actually pull back one level and I would just say on-site support requirement as opposed to remote.
Yeah.
Definitely makes them
Definitely
higher
there.
effort.
John, our model's definitely changed a lot since COVID.
I would say the escalating client, that client that loves to escalate everything up the chain.
Yeah. What's the worst is the escalating client that knows your owner.
I was just gonna say the client who goes around the process.
That's exactly right. Like, oh, I golf with so-and-so, so now I can call them all of the time. Yes. We had a special color for that at Performance Matters, actually. Decision maker. Oh, yes. And Billy, that one is an interesting, I see many people putting that in the health of the client, but it can also be the effort or the pain in the behind factor. So I'll call that sentiment, just because that's what we have it listed in the platform, but it is that decision maker mentality. Really, it's their attitude toward technology and the willingness to communicate all those things. So when
having business managers, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go.
Having office manager or business managers as our liaisons.
So my favorite for that is gatekeeper, because they're good.
Yes.
Like, my golly, they can smile at you over the phone and not let you get anywhere.
Katrina, I think we've worked with some of the same clients.
So the reason I thought it would be easy if I had the whiteboard is because I can also show my my screen at the same time. And what I want to talk about here is what effort is doing is populating them up and down on the screen. And we can determine in CS account settings which of these we want to include. Now, some of you, if you're in this for the first time and you're like drinking through the fire hose, you may love every single one of these until you then realize you have 50 clients and you now have to define these for 50 clients. And then suddenly you hate this idea, right? So we need a combo platter of the few things we can automate and the other parts that are very important. So in the platform, let's talk about what we can automate. The number one thing that we see automated is the number of tickets or the number of tickets per seat. Because the reality of it is, if it's 100 user client that puts in 100 tickets, that's way different than a 10 user client that puts in 100 tickets, right? So you might like the per seat model of that, because it's 1 ticket per person versus 10 tickets per person, right? Somebody's got bigger issues than others. So in effort, and I'm in, my demo site already has populated effort scores, but you can add, so when you come in here, you probably see nothing but a blank screen saying you can set up your metrics. If you click plus, you can add a new health metric. So let's talk about these. The two things, sorry, I'm in health. I want to be in effort. Let me switch over to effort metrics. The drop downs will be upper right after this weekend if they haven't switched already. So we have three things we can automate on the right-hand side. Number of tickets, right? So this can be automated. Number of locations. So maybe if mobility might deal with locations, you might consider that, maybe not. And then the other piece is import from assessment. So some folks, this sentiment piece, Billy, if that's associated to how aligned they are to your stack, right? If those two things go together, then this might in fact be able to be automated if you consider it the same, right? So you could add any of these. If I want to import from assessment, it's going to ask you to define the template, define the assessment that you want to import from. You can give it a description, you can give it an icon, and you can give it a weighting. So what we're going to do is average all of these pieces. We norm it from 1 to 100, from 0 to 100. Then we average them based, it's a weighted average. If you want to geek over the math, I absolutely will do that with you. And then that's what scores them. So they rank on that chart. The custom metric could be anything that you want. So the custom metric could be all of these other things. I would say the most popular custom metric we see is contracted hours worked, or John, I think that goes with after hours work too. So like above and beyond contract would be something that we see as a custom metric. You do have to define how you're going to score this. So the one thing about Lifecycle Insights is you might score something on a scale of 1 to 5. Number of after hours works is a score on 0 to infinity, right? But everything's got to be on a scale of 1 to 100. So we have folks that have documented, and let's do after hours support as an example. After hours support, 0 to 1 if, or I'll say 0 to, yeah. It could be, I'm going to score this a 0 if they go over contract by less than 2 hours. We're going to score them a 25 if they are between 3 and 10, a 50 if they, right? So you want to define the rubric for yourself. In education, we call it a rubric. So you need to create the rule of what makes sense. So a 50 if they're between 10 and 15, 75 between 15 and 20, and then 100 if they are over 20, right? Now, you might not like that at all, which is totally fine because you can customize it for yourself, right? But then once you have defined that, you'll go into each client and manually add, and that metric to it. The beauty of it is if you don't have that scored for the client, it will ignore it and it will only be scored on the components that they do have. So that's what we're aiming for there. So let's go into creative designs.
Do you say that we would be able to import that?
Not yet. We would like to get to the place where you could import via CSV, right? So you could just pull everybody in. Right now, it is one client at a time. You'll have to move the slider, but that is definitely a request we've already talked about. So let's look at the bottom where I added, right? Contract hours used. Oh, I didn't. This is so here the effort score can be moved, etc. Number of locations, this is automated. It tells you if it's automated. Stack alignment, right? I've chosen what stack it is. My maturity assessment model is in fact one of the scores for the assessment that I've already given. Number of tickets, this is automated. And segment effort is just the manual number that I typed in. So thoughts on effort? I would say less is more until you're confident more is important. Right? So start with some automation, number of tickets, see what it looks like. Does everybody land in the right quadrant? If they do, great. You might as well stick with a single automated metric if it works. But if you're thinking what I really want is tickets and a single override value, add that to it. I would not recommend, let's start with 10 things and have everybody go out and score these on all 10 things. I see some sort of begrudged, like, yep, that's probably right. While we might want more, less probably is the right way to start. Is that fair? Okay.
Walk before you run.
Yes, let's do that. So exactly what we just did is how we're going to set up our health metrics. So the health metrics are a little bit different. I would like to point out one thing for the effort metric. If you use the assessment, let me grab the assessment one. If you use an assessment sorry, I want to go back to effort, like I said. Let me grab my assessment. If I grab my assessment, think about the assessment scores go up, right, from 0 to 100%. And if they scored a 95%, they're not a ton of effort, right? It's kind of the inverse of that. They're well aligned to your stacks and services, so they're very supportable. So we actually invert it. And that would be less effort if they're fully aligned to your stack. So you're going to want to kind of check your numbers around that, because health is the opposite. They are healthier, like the higher the number on your stack alignment. So if we're in health, these are the metrics that we can automate. Again, on the slide deck, I have a health article linked in there. And here for health, we automate Smile Back, so CSAT. This morning we talked to CrewWho. So those of you that are CrewWho partners, we have a CrewWho integration now about to happen, and SimpleSat is the next one that we're going to integrate with. So those two are coming. Feel free to put in the chat which CSAT tool you use if it's not one of those. Biz Ratings is also on the list, just so you know. We also can import from assessment. And then you can have any manual. So what are some of the custom health things? And health is, what is the likelihood that this client is going to churn? So what are the, or what is the indicator that they are a happy client? What are some ideas you use to think about health? Or danger. What's a sign that, like, who they just asked me for the passwords to everything? Okay, Katrina's like, yep, that one.
You know, the old fashioned ghosting is, to me,
Yeah.
thing. You know, are they ghosting because things are good, or are they ghosting because they're not happy and just don't want to confront you about their challenge?
Yep, silence is absolutely deadly. If they're putting in tickets, they're still working with you. If they're yelling at you, they're even still working with you. If they've stopped yelling at you, it's like when mom gets real quiet. Truth. There are a couple that I like to add. We've got some that we auto sort of suggest on the screen. So Billy, this is the other place where we see sentiment, right? What is their technology attitude toward working with us? Every time I come in, do they love all the things and take any suggestion? I got to tell you, my dentist, he is, like I said last week, he loves his managed service provider. that he is green all over the place for his managed service provider. Versus somebody that's really just sees it as a thorn in their side that they have to pay for technology, right? Because it's not what they believe essential to their business, although we know that it is. Another one that I think is important is org. Give it an org score. People often ask me what I mean by this. A couple things. Is the organization stable? During COVID, when COVID first hit, a lot of people were scoring their partners based on the industry they were in. Restaurants became a threat. MSPs that only worked with restaurants were in jeopardy because they only worked with restaurants, right? It's no fault of your own, but it's a reality. So is the organization, right? Are they at a risk for anything? Is that organization getting a new leader or getting acquired? What happens when somebody gets acquired? Steve, you and I talked about it the other day, right? Oh, I thought they were going to come in with their own IT department, but I managed to sell them our services. So you got the upsell, but you knew you had to have that conversation because otherwise they were going to come in with their IT department and we would potentially lose that client, right? So if you have the org on there and you suddenly put it red, right? You go in, you have a call, you score them red, their bubble on the customer segmentation chart will go red, and that'll be an indicator that you need to go have a conversation with them. So there's sort of a, over time, these may go up and down, but also having something that you can use as some sort of red flag indicator.
Another one, Marnie, and comes out of our meeting from yesterday or training from yesterday is how often do they follow your recommendations? If you're constantly putting recommendations out there and they turn stale in the definition that we used, you know, if you've proposed it 3 times and through 3 QBRs and it's still sitting there, that's a sign to me that, you know, something's not just right. We're not aligned properly with the client, or they're not aligned with where we're trying to take them.
And that one actually is one of the ones that we're going to put as default in the how to score a business review that comes out this weekend. So I think that might work well there. For health, I've got many of our larger partners actually have built an assessment in the VCIO side of the house where the customer success person goes in and scores them before a business review or once a month to track it, instead of coming into customer success and manually moving each one. They do a single assessment and import that. So, because that'll automate it, right? It's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. You're doing the assessment one place or the other, but if you want to add notes to it, that is a good way to do that as an aside.
Yeah, that's interesting, because after we talked the other night, that was something where, you know, looking at what we're looking to do with our relationship managers, we were trying to figure out, and I said, you know, as I was driving back, I'm saying, should I be doing this as an assessment or should I be doing it in CS? And it was, this solves the problem, because you can get, I think, more granular within an assessment to the topics that are important to your organization, where I've so far, and can't touch it yet, so I don't know what it's going to be like on the CS side, but now that you can pull it from one side to the other, that makes the assessment much more appealing.
Yep. So those are the bits and parts that you kind of really want to look at. The other piece in setting up health or effort is that the cut scores, we have it from 0 to 50 is red, 50 to 80 is yellow, 80 to 100 is green. I say this all the time. Folks that are schooled in the United States are typically very accustomed to this. You can score it however you want. Some folks want to make it much more stringent. But the other thing I will warn you on is if you get accustomed to scoring everything 50 to 100, you never end up as red. So you need to define good rules for yourself to what would make someone fail. So in school, we always said there's death by zero. It is deadly to give a student a zero because it is almost impossible to recover from. But the reverse of that is hardly anybody ever gives a zero on anything. If you had a scale of 0 to 100, what's the last time you gave somebody a 3? Right? It's just the math has gotta work out for you. So you just might want to think about that. So I was aiming to have 15 minutes left where folks could actually start doing this in the platform, and I would attempt to just be quiet and support. So we'll see how that goes. Unless you ask me a question, I'll talk. So what I would love to see if folks to go into customer account settings, setting up their health and effort admin, checking out their contracts that they want to exclude, et cetera, and see if they have everything set up. If again, you're not in customer success and you want to hop off the call and you hopefully got some value out of this, not offended. And if you're staying, I would love for you to just dig in, start poking around, and then ask questions as you have them, either in chat or out loud. I'll answer as we go.
Hey, Marty, this was a question on email instead of the person's not here.
Okay.
The question was, is there a way to see tracking or trending on health and effort over time for the various components of each to see if people are improving, or is it always red in a given area?
Gotcha. Inside of customer detail, when you go into, and Mark, you might want to send him this video and refer him to this minute because
it'll be said.
Yeah, okay. In health metrics, you can see this little, it's called a spark line that shows it tracking over time. And then in health for effort, the same thing. So we don't currently have yet an exportable report that shows it over time, although we can see it here. We are capturing the data so we can build that report.
Okay.
So right now it is just, you can see that where it's trending. But again, we don't have a printout of it.
I will let him know. Thank you.
I guess a follow-up question to that end, then, is there a matrices, or will there be a matrices where you could look at all your clients instead of individually, so you can look for problems?
Yeah, so that is one of the beauties of the customer segment, and we're going to have quite a few more metrics to be able to add to this. So when this one loads, we'll see what else is available in the gears. So in the gear, you can see that I've got the org score, the CSAT score, right? So all of those pieces that I just added are available as columns on this screen. So I can't export this yet, but you can, right? I can go add org. And if I've scored, you can see I've got org scores for everybody. So now who's got the lowest org score, right? I can track down and I can see the 50s. Planet Express and Galactic Empires Enterprises are not happy with us right now. So you can almost use this to build your own report based on those individual metrics.
And in the scheme of things, the export of that after it's built is relatively easy.
Yeah. Yep.
I wish I could offer smooth jazz as one of the musics.
That's definitely not it.
Sorry, I had to break the silence.
It was not smooth.
I've got music playing under my desk, Mark, so I hear you.
Yeah, that was not smooth at all.
In 3 minutes, I do have a question for folks. So just so you know, putting you on the clock.
Some of us don't like being under pressure, Marty.
I hear you.
Marnie, did we talk about renewals under health metrics?
Oh, we did not.
What is that?
So honestly, that came from, I was on a demo with folks the other day and they wanted to include that as one of their metrics because they had a specific renewal team that tracked they just had a metric called renewals. So I added that to show them how they could do it. But I think if you have defined the other ones, it will lead toward whether or not your renewal is at risk. And I think they specifically were tracking toward, like, somebody had said, we're going to renew green, or there's, that somebody has said, we're not planning on renewing with you, that type of thing. It's more like a red flag.
Marnie, as I'm going through the activity of importing contracts, down the road, pipe dream feature, if instead of having to click all the individual ones for some accounts that that you're just going to bring in everything, wouldn't it be nice just to have that select all? That's the only thing I'm going to highlight as I'm just combing through some things here.
I think when we first built out the contract piece, well, I know what happened is that because we pull all of the data at once and there's a lot, right? And some folks have tons of things they're not using. We weren't sure what the data was going to look like. Now that we have a better sense, like, okay, we're not actually going to get all of ConnectWise landing in our instance of data. We probably could do it. But the initial was like, let's throttle this just in case our Amazon bill quintuples in, a day and a half.
It's certainly understandable, and this case and scenario, at least it forces due diligence to look at each individual one. But that down the road, I can imagine wanting to just streamline it more as I have new clients coming on board.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Sometimes we're not sure. We try to save ourselves from ourselves and save you from yourself sometimes, and we're not sure what we sometimes don't need. We're not always quite sure what exactly we're saving ourselves from, but in this case, we're like, we've seen some of those managed sites. We should watch out.
This will be a newbie question, which I usually try to avoid. But if somebody is an active VCIO, they're automatically going to show up on the CS side?
Yes.
Okay. I thought so, but I didn't see a place that I could check off.
Yeah, you can't control it. So that is why we recommend folks getting VCIO rolling before turning on customer success, because everybody's going to land over there. Yeah.
Yep.
But that takes me to the time when I wanted to have another question for you. So last week I shared with you, and I'm going to share it again. So let me get into the dev site. Don't tell them.
Arnie, this is recorded.
Curses. I always have that control in Zoom. I can, or in YouTube, I'll bag it up. Actually, they want to know the answer to this, to be quite honest, because this is coming out this weekend. So last week I talked about this. We're going to be able to score the business review, right? And you can control these questions. So you can ask whatever you want, but in typical life cycle fashion, and because Zach doesn't want to have to go back and do work if we can do it for him, we'd rather populate this with things that are meaningful. So as we look at reporting, we have heard this a lot. Did the decision maker show up? Did we meet on cadence? Did we get recommendations accepted? Steve, you mentioned that today. Did stack alignment improve, right? Did they accept something that's going to move the needle that gets them more aligned with stack? We know we auto collect that data, but let's face it, the day they sign doesn't mean it's the day it happened. So in order to score that business review right out of the gate, we're going to have the customer success human check these pieces. These were just the first 4 I came up with. What would be better ones? What am I missing? What don't you like? Hit me with your best shot. And you can always edit this if I ignore you completely and just do this anyway. But I'd really like to hear what would make sense for this. And if you're thinking, well, I can't think of other things. For the record, I spent 3 hours over 3 days with some partners talking through this. So we really did try to come up with some reasonable things. I didn't just take a wild guess this morning.
I'll throw one in there, Marnie. I think it wouldn't hurt to ask if they participated in the budget forecasting.
Oh, okay. I like that.
Or maybe contributes the right word.
Yep. So this is how you'll be able to change this, folks. I went into account settings, hit business review manager. There's settings upper right, standards. And then I can say, also, some folks on this call last week asked me this specifically. 100% external users will not see this scoring. Even if you have given them access to that page, you will only get to see it if you're an internal user. Also, you will only see these questions if you are a customer success partner. Even though it lives in VCIO, the reporting is going to land in customer success, because this is going to really attribute to a bit, like account managers, verticals, etc. John, what you got for me?
So I had a question just on customer segmentation,
Yeah.
but we can do it offline if you need. But one of the things that maybe I don't see or I missed is opportunity with a partner. So one of the things that we rate is if we have a high level of opportunity, but an initial low level of engagement. So they may have a low value initially, but might have huge upside potential,
Yep.
which would dictate a higher cadence that would maybe put them in. Manually putting them in with that cadence of like just manually putting them over there.
Yeah.
I would rather have that tied to actual opportunities in LCI that I'm tracking. That way I can, in the reviews, do all of the opportunity stuff that's tied in with that. Having that influence their segmentation would be nice.
So you're exactly right. You figured out the workaround already, right? Some folks do manually move it in segmentation, but I
Yep.
do wonder, in the same way that I think Billy was saying, like, how can we use contracts to add, if there are project costs that they're buying every month, but are not in the recurring revenue. A short-term hack would be to go ahead and add here, right? And put an opportunity contract in.
Yep.
So you could do that today if you wanted to alert you in some way,
Yep.
but to be able to define it as such as opposed to a contract and make it an opportunity, that makes sense. Jim, I'm going to look into your site so I can get back to you on your assessments. I see your chat now, sorry. But John, I totally makes sense. So in school systems, we always do things by student counts. And I had one school system that piloted for 800 students, but they had 40,000. Right? So when I charted them, I would manually overwrite it and make them 40,000 because I knew the opportunity was there. So I completely get it. So anything else? I liked Alex's suggestion for the particular comment in the business review. Anything else for today? Things you loved, things you hated. Next week, we're going to do stack alignment and goals. Yay, I know. I have to hold that to the end so everybody comes, right? And then again, we'll take a week off and then we'll have follow-up the next week because we'll have more items to be released at that time. So we're excited about that. Awesome. Jim, I will reach out to you. And then if anybody else has questions, you know how to reach out to us, info@ or Marnie.Stockman or any of us. Just grab us how you can. All right. Thanks all. Have good ones.